At 14, my father hit me twice and threw me out into a blizzard. All because of my sister's lies. I nearly died, but my mother made sure justice was delivered. The door slammed shut, making a sound that echoed not only through the storm-lashed night, but deep inside my bones. A final, unmistakable crack. Can you imagine being thrown out into a blizzard, shoeless and coatless, by your own father? All because your sister, fueled by a spiteful lie, tricked him into believing I'd attacked her, a lie that nearly cost me my life and shattered our family forever. That winter in Wisconsin, December meant the darkness arrived early, swallowing the daylight by 5:30. Our kitchen, usually a hub of warmth and laughter, felt eerily quiet that evening as I hunched over my math equations. The numbers blurred, replaced by the relentless snow piling up outside. The weather service had been screaming warnings all day, a frantic chorus against the approaching storm's deceptive silence. But Hannah, my 17-year-old sister, a master manipulator and always getting what she wanted, had decided she needed to go to the mall with her friends. For once, Dad stood firm. The roads were already a treacherous canvas of ice and white, visibility dropping faster than the temperature. And the storm? It was only getting worse. Hannah's face shifted through a rapid series of emotions. Astonishment at being told no. A flash of pure wrath, then that cold, unsettling flicker of calculation. She stomped upstairs, the slam of her bedroom door rattling the cheap frames in the hall. Honestly, I was just grateful to be invisible for a change, a ghost amidst their unfolding drama. But here's the thing. You never truly understand the dark currents running beneath the surface until something shatters the illusion of peace. What happened next? It replays in my memory, a never-ending loop of terror I can't escape. 25 minutes later, Hannah appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Her makeup was artfully smudged, her shirt ripped just so at the neck, and she was racked with sobs. But these weren't the furious, resentful tears from earlier. This was a deliberate, dramatic performance, punctuated by gasping hyperventilation. Dad dropped his newspaper, the rustle startlingly loud in the sudden silence. His face went utterly white. Her story was elaborate, a tapestry of deception woven with vivid, devastating details. She accused me of following her upstairs, attacking her for being the favorite, pushing her against the wall, tearing her clothes, and venomously spitting. I wish she'd never been born. Each charge, delivered between convincingly painful cries, was more absurd than the last. She claimed I'd been plagued by envy for years, had threatened her before, and she'd been too scared to speak. It was pathological manipulation, textbook style. People like Hannah, they don't just fabricate lies on the fly. They plan them, meticulously, playing on family weaknesses to get what they want. Consequences be damned. They understand how to weaponize victimhood, shifting blame and shaping narratives with chilling precision. Dad slowly stood up, his gaze hardening into something I'd never seen aimed at me. Cold, hard, rage. My voice was a terrified whisper as I pleaded with him. I tried to explain, pointing to my math homework scattered across the table, the fresh pencil lines and half-solved problems as indisputable proof I'd been right there, in plain sight, the entire time. He didn't listen. Maybe he was already too angry, too consumed by Hannah's seemingly genuine pain to hear logic. Or maybe her act was just that compelling. She'd always been theatrical, able to cry on command, but I never believed she'd use those talents against me. He grabbed my arm, jerking me from the chair with such force that my water glass shattered on the tile floor. The deafening crash was a horrific punctuation to Hannah's renewed, dramatic wails. He kept shouting accusations. How dare I hurt my sister? What kind of person was I becoming? He'd raised me better, given me everything. This was how I repaid him? His grip on my arm tightened, a cry of pain tearing from me, which only seemed to fuel his fury. He thought I was copying Hannah's drama, putting on a show. My mom, bless her sensible heart, was 4 states away, caring for her sister after surgery, something Hannah had definitely factored into her timing. Mom would have questioned, scrutinized, investigated. Dad just reacted. The first slap landed with a violent force that stole my breath, stunning me into a silence deeper than any scream. My cheek burned with searing, furious heat, and I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. He'd never been a violent man. I'd never even been spanked. But something in Hannah's twisted story ignited a rage in him I'd never known existed. The second blow sent me staggering backward, my hips smashing hard against the kitchen counter. Hannah's tears had stopped. Through the spinning cloud of pain in my eyes, I saw her watching from the doorway, her face almost interested. No fear, no astonishment, just pure, cold satisfaction. The look of someone whose perfectly planned strategy was playing out exactly as expected. That expression, that icy, smug sparkle in her eyes, told me everything about how premeditated this treachery was. Dad's instant, exaggerated reaction, fueled by Hannah's performance, was a terrifying example of confirmation bias. He wanted to believe Hannah was the victim, and her act reinforced that perception, overriding any rational thought. When people are that emotionally charged, they're blind to contradictory evidence, especially if it challenges their deepest beliefs about their own children. Dad hauled me to the front door. Despite my frantic screams, my hoarse assurances that I hadn't done anything wrong, the storm outside had worsened. The wind shrieked around the house. Snow piled against the porch railing. He shoved me out into the bitter cold, barefoot and gloveless, wearing only the thin jacket I'd worn to school. The door slammed behind me, and I heard the sickening thud of the deadbolts falling into place. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The wind tore at my meager clothes, and the snow instantly soaked through my socks. I hammered on the door, yelling until my throat was raw, but no one answered. Hannah stood at the window, arms crossed, watching me freeze. She grinned, then turned away. I had no choice but to move. Standing still meant succumbing to the cold. And even at 14, I understood the terrifying seriousness of my situation. My best friend, Sophie, lived 5 streets away. On a normal day, it was a quick walk. But in this blizzard, it felt like an impossible polar expedition. The snow had already blurred the lines between yard and street, transforming everything into a hazardous, homogeneous white expanse. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. Streetlights were useless halos in the swirling pandemonium. Walking was a brutal struggle. Snowdrifts grabbed at my ankles and I fell twice. My hands sank into drifts that reached nearly to my waist. My fingers were already numb, my face burning with frostbite. The wind became an unseen force. With every cold breath, every house I passed was a beacon of warmth and safety shining through the swirling snow. I saw families moving in their kitchens, children watching TV in cozy living rooms, normal Saturday night lives unfolding while I was fighting for mine outside. Shame, a frigid companion, kept me from knocking, from pleading for rescue. How could I even explain this? What words could make sense of your own father throwing you out? Sophie's house finally loomed through the snow like a mirage, bringing an unexpected surge of desperate hope. My frozen brain had acted on pure, desperate instinct. Their porch light was on, a beautiful golden beacon. I stumbled up their driveway, tripped twice climbing the porch stairs, and crashed against the front door. My fists were too numb to bang, so I kicked the wood. I was sure the storm's fury would swallow the weak thumps. Then the door opened, and Sophie's mother, Mrs. Collins, gasped. Mrs. Collins, a woman I'd known since 2nd grade, pulled me inside without a word, her warm hands cradling my icy face as she called for her husband. They wrapped me in blankets, sat me by their roaring fireplace, and brought me hot cocoa, which I couldn't even grasp because my fingers refused to cooperate. Sophie emerged in her pajamas, her eyes wide with shock. The Collins family, bless their hearts, didn't press for explanations right away. Mrs. Collins gently checked my face, her own tightening into a hard knot when she saw the bruises already blooming on my cheek and jaw. Mr. Collins, a quiet man, went upstairs and returned with dry clothes, thick socks, and a huge sweater. They just let me sit there, defrosting, the uncontrollable shaking lasting for what felt like hours as my body struggled to regain its warmth. But that was only the beginning of the horror. Eventually the words started to flow, first in broken pieces, then in a raw, uncontrollable torrent as the full narrative poured out. Hannah's lies, Dad's terrifying reaction, the violent expulsion into the snow. Mrs. Collins's face cycled between shock, fear, and a furious, protective rage. Mr. Collins grew utterly silent, the kind of silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any scream. They tried calling my house. No answer. They tried 4 more times over the next hour, met with the same chilling silence. Dad was either deliberately ignoring the phone or had simply turned off the ringer, a habit he sometimes indulged in for quiet. Mrs. Collins left a message on the answering machine. Her voice was carefully controlled as she explained I was safe with them. She didn't mention the horrific state I'd arrived in, but her tone was unmistakably glacial. Sophie and I had been inseparable since 2nd grade. Her parents knew my family well. Mrs. Collins had always liked and respected my mother's work as a nurse. She'd been cordial, if a little cool, towards my father. Now, with the chilling clarity of hindsight, I see why. She must have noticed something, a tiny warning sign of the aggression he'd kept hidden until that night. Sleep was impossible. I lay in Sophie's guest room, safe and warm. Still, my mind replayed the evening's events. Hannah's calculating face bothered me most. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of rage. It was carefully planned, orchestrated, precisely timed for Mom's absence. But why? What had I done to deserve such venom from my own sister? The answer arrived with the morning light, cutting through the curtains like a sharp revelation. Hannah had wanted to go to the mall. Dad said no. She needed to divert his attention, to create a situation so severe that her original request would be forgotten. I had been convenient collateral, a sacrifice she was willing to make to shift his focus, a pawn in her devious game. The realization churned my stomach, a sharp metallic taste in my mouth. My mother arrived at the Collins house at 8 a.m. on Sunday. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving 3 feet of fresh snow and roads barely half cleared. Mom must have driven through treacherous conditions, rushing home early, putting her sister's recovery on hold in the face of this unexpected, desperate need. Mrs. Collins had finally reached her late the night before and carefully explained the situation. The moment Mom saw me, her face was a mask of profound sadness and rising fury. Mrs. Collins had painstakingly photographed my injuries with her digital camera, preserving the evidence before it faded. The pictures clearly showed a handprint on my cheek, another bruise on my jaw, and finger-shaped marks on my upper arm from Dad's brutal grip. My mother examined each shot, her face darkening with every click. She hugged me tightly, as if I might shatter, her hands trembling as she caressed my face, absorbing the terrible deed perpetrated against her daughter. I had never seen my mother cry before. She was always pragmatic, stoic, dealing with situations with the same calm efficiency she employed at the hospital. But tears streamed down her cheeks as she listened to my story of the previous night, and something fundamental, irreversible, shifted behind her eyes. This was a breaking point, a watershed moment. The old equilibrium, however dysfunctional, could no longer be maintained. My mother, who had been absent, now became the unstoppable force, propelled by a keen understanding of the betrayal and danger. Her reaction showed the incredible psychological power needed to confront abuse and set firm boundaries. The journey home was silent. Mom's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, yet her expression remained oddly serene. It was the face she wore when dealing with difficult patients, a mask of controlled wrath. I watched her profile and felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe things wouldn't be okay. They'd never be the same again, but they would certainly be different. When we walked in, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the Sunday paper like any other morning. He looked up, his expression morphing from astonishment to immediate, crushing remorse when his gaze landed on me. The bruises, now a vibrant purple and yellow, told their own undeniable story. He opened his lips to speak, but Mom raised her hand, a quiet, uncompromising demand. When she spoke, her voice was calm, yet powerful like a tidal wave. Don't talk. Just listen. Hannah appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. She froze, calculations flashing across her face as she tried to assess the situation. Mom turned to her, and whatever my sister saw in that expression made her instinctively take a step back. Mom presented the facts, calmly and dispassionately. The timing was unequivocal. I had been at the kitchen table when Hannah claimed I'd attacked her. There was the testimony of the Collins family who had sheltered me, irrefutable photographs documenting the violence Dad had inflicted, and the medical evaluation Mrs. Collins had insisted on that morning, confirming minor frostbite on my fingers and toes, exposure-related injuries that could have been fatal. Blocks in that storm, she explained, had been a potentially deadly distance. Dad tried to interject, to explain he'd been protecting Hannah, that he'd believed his daughter, that he'd responded in the moment. But even he could tell his justifications were hollow. His face went bleak as Mom calmly detailed the snowy conditions, the brutally low temperatures, and the very real probability that I might not have survived. Then Mom turned to Hannah. Tell the truth. Now. My sister's face went through its usual rapid-fire sequence. Defiance, then calculation, then pure, unadulterated dread. She was good at lying, but not good enough to fool our mother, especially not with that cold, clinical stare fixed on her. The stillness grew oppressive, suffocating, until Hannah's shoulders slumped in surrender. The confession came unwillingly, followed by a terrible tranquility. She had wanted to go to the mall. She'd been upset at being told no. She'd decided to create a diversion. Yes, she had ripped her own clothes. Yes, she had purposefully smudged her makeup. Yes, she fabricated the entire narrative about me attacking her. Her voice was tiny, almost inaudible when she finally admitted it. Nothing like the assured performance from the night before. Dad's face was ashen. He stared at Hannah as if seeing her for the first time, then at me, then back at Mom. The awful realization of what he had done had finally set in. He had thrashed and expelled his innocent daughter based on a deliberate falsehood. He'd almost murdered me because he was too quick to trust a theatrical play. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. Mom's response was meticulous, precise, and utterly crushing. That morning, she had already made phone calls from the Collins residence. Things were already in motion and could not be stopped. Dad would be moving out immediately, she informed him. Not eventually, not after they discussed it. Now, she had already called a divorce attorney. Papers were being prepared to be filed Monday morning. The house would be sold. She had already met with a real estate agent and arranged for an appraisal. Everything but custody would be divided equally. She would have sole custody of me and no visitation with him until I decided I wanted contact. Not if I decide, she clarified, but when I decide on my terms on my timeline. Until then, you have no parental rights in my eyes. Dad tried to argue, claiming it was a mistake, that he deserved another chance to make things right. Mom's expression remained unchanging, like a granite wall. One mistake, she acknowledged, but a mistake that nearly killed your daughter. A mistake that showed such catastrophically poor judgment that I can no longer trust you with any authority over our family. You had one job as a father, keep your children safe. You failed spectacularly. To Hannah, Mom's response was equally cold and exact. My sister would finish the school year. Then she would move in with our father, wherever he ended up. She'd made her decision when she lied, Mom said. She had decided to exploit Dad's trust, sacrificing her sister for something as insignificant as a trip to the mall. These were not the acts of someone who cherished family, so she could accept the consequences. Hannah protested immediately and loudly. She wailed, "I made a mistake." She hadn't intended for things to go this far. She hadn't expected Dad to react so angrily. Mom's face remained unwavering as the justifications poured forth. Hannah had seen me freeze on the porch and grinned as I hammered on the door. That was not an error. It was cruel, and there would be repercussions. After abuse, creating solid legal and emotional boundaries is critical to regaining agency and ensuring safety. Dad packed 2 suitcases under Mom's careful supervision. She followed him around the house, making sure he only took his own possessions, nothing that could be disputed later. He tried several times to apologize to me, his voice cracking, but the words felt empty, hollow. Sorry didn't stop the hitting. Sorry didn't erase the trek through the storm, the horror of freezing, or the awful betrayal of being tossed out by the person who was meant to protect me. He left before midday. Mom stood by the door, her stance rigid, watching him drive away, disappearing around the corner. Then she turned to Hannah, who had been loitering in the hallway, still unsure if she could talk her way out of trouble. Mom's reaction spoke volumes. No amount of tears would suffice this time. The next several weeks were a blur of legal processes. Mom handled it all with the same calm efficiency she used in medical situations, checking off items on a mental checklist, filing divorce papers, obtaining a restraining order, listing the house, scheduling therapy sessions. Everything was documented, photographed, and recorded. She built such a strong case that Dad's lawyer urged him not to challenge anything. School got complicated. Word had spread about what happened. Maybe Sophie told someone. Maybe the truth just slips out, as it often does in small towns. Everyone looked at me differently. Teachers were overly kind. My classmates either avoided me or tried too hard to be pleasant. Hannah had it even worse. People had heard she lied and that her lie almost killed me. Her friends abandoned her, unable to trust someone capable of such treachery. Hannah tried to make amends, but her attempts were awkward and clearly motivated by desperation, not genuine regret. She missed her friends and her old life. Her deceit had ruined everything. Mom watched these attempts with the same clinical detachment, never interfering or softening. There will be consequences, she'd warned Hannah. Actions have them. Dad leased an apartment across town, somewhere modest and gloomy that perfectly represented his much-reduced circumstances. The divorce settlement awarded him precisely half the assets, but half wasn't much after legal fees and the cost of starting a new life. His new job paid less, partly because news had spread about his sudden availability. Nobody seemed to want to hire the dad who almost murdered his child. He wrote letters that I didn't read and left voicemails that I didn't listen to. Mom preserved everything, methodically documenting his attempts to communicate for legal grounds. The divorce process exposed truths about my parents' marriage that I'd never known. Mom had been unhappy for years, but stayed for practical reasons. Stability for us, financial security, the usual considerations when contemplating splitting a family. Dad's violence had given her all the rationale she needed. Unequivocal proof that remaining was more perilous than leaving. Dad's counsel tried to portray him as a worried father who overreacted in a state of stress. The tactic failed when Mom's counsel submitted images, medical records, and meteorological data from that night, demonstrating how dangerous the conditions had been. The judge's grave, uncompromising demeanor as she reviewed the evidence said volumes. No legal trickery could justify putting a child into a blizzard. The custody hearing was brutal. Dad's lawyer called me to the stand, trying to get me to declare I wanted a relationship with my father, that I missed him, that I knew he made a mistake. I spoke directly to Dad, studying his expression as I recounted the trek through the storm in graphic, frightening detail. the numbness creeping through my limbs, the crushing confusion, the bone-deep terror that I might die. After 20 minutes, his lawyer stopped asking me questions. Hannah also testified, despite her own counsel advising against it. She attempted to justify her deception as an impulsive act of a teenager, quickly regretted. However, the prosecution obtained footage from our doorbell camera. I had no idea this footage existed. It showed Hannah watching me stumble on the porch with a faint, unsettling grin before turning away. The film was devastating, impossible to dismiss as typical adolescent folly. She had taken pleasure in my agony. Mom's testimony was clinical and heartbreaking. She went over the timeline, pointing out flaws in Hannah's story that Dad should have seen if he'd bothered to ask questions. She offered proof of Hannah's pattern of manipulation, including minor lies over the years and situations where my sister had twisted facts to get her way. This had not been a unique instance. There had been an escalation. The judge granted Mom full custody with wording that made Dad's prospects of obtaining visits nearly impossible. The decision cited his catastrophic failure of judgment, willingness to use violence without evidence, and reckless endangerment of a minor child. "You nearly murdered your child," she stated, "and this court will not give you another chance to do so." During the divorce proceedings, financial discovery showed that Dad had been concealing money. Not huge quantities, but enough to paint a clear picture of dishonesty. He had a separate bank account and made some investments he never acknowledged. Mom's lawyer seized on these revelations, painting a picture of a man who had been duplicitous even before the Hannah incident. The judge adjusted the settlement accordingly, awarding Mom 65% of the marital assets rather than the standard 50-50 split. Dad's parents tried to intervene. They called Mom, suggested family therapy, and argued that breaking up the family was too drastic. Mom met with them once, brought the pictures and medical reports, and explained exactly what their son had done to me. They left that meeting in stunned silence, their arguments abandoned in the face of overwhelming facts. They didn't contact us again. We relocated, moving to a smaller home on the opposite side of town, 3 bedrooms instead of 4, a basic kitchen. But it was ours, mine and Mom's place, free of treachery or violence. Mom let me choose paint colors for my room, helped me arrange furniture, and made sure I had everything I needed. She was kinder with me than she had been before, more cautious, as if I were something precious that had almost been lost. Hannah moved in with Dad in June, right after school ended. The situation was exactly as Mom had promised. Finished the school year in familiar surroundings, then moved to Dad's small apartment. My sister's complaints had dwindled by then, replaced by a morose resignation. She understood Mom meant every word, and no amount of tears or trickery could change the outcome. The apartment complex where Dad and Hannah ended up was in a rougher section of town, with police sirens blaring every night and a parking lot full of cars with expired registrations. Dad's lower income meant less favorable circumstances. Hannah hated it. She'd grown up in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood, with friends who had pools and finished basements. Now she shared a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued so loudly every word could be heard. Her new school was also harsher, full of kids who didn't care about her former social standing. She was a nobody there, just another new girl with an attitude problem. I learned about their problems through the grapevine. Mutual friends, people who knew both families. Dad was drinking more, showing up late to work, barely holding his life together. Hannah was failing classes, getting into fights, spiraling in ways that suggested she was finally grasping how much she'd destroyed. Hearing about their deterioration brought a dismal satisfaction, but a larger part of me just felt empty. School had changed for me too, though in different ways. Teachers who knew me before regarded me with caution, as if I might shatter if they pushed too hard. Guidance counselors kept arranging check-ins, asking how I was adapting if I needed someone to talk to. The attention was stifling, even though I knew it came from a place of concern. But my grades improved as everything fell apart. With the chaos at home gone, I could focus on my studies without waiting for the next explosion. Mom created a space that was peaceful and orderly, allowing me to concentrate. Math made sense in ways it hadn't before. When I wasn't on edge, I could write English essays with ease. Sophie remained my best friend through everything. Her parents testified at the custody court. Their story of my arrival that night carried substantial weight. Mr. Collins described my condition in stark medical terms. Early stages of hypothermia, frostbite on exposed limbs, clear evidence of shock and trauma. His evidence visibly unsettled Dad's lawyer. The Collins family never treated me differently, never made me feel like a charity case or victim. Sophie's house became a second home, a place where normal life could continue. Movie nights, study sessions, meals where the most dramatic moment was someone forgetting to set the table. That normalcy provided healing in ways that therapy alone did not. Mom returned to work with fresh zeal, working extra shifts, volunteering, enrolling in training programs she'd previously turned down. I realized she was processing everything through action, burning off her fury and terror by staying constantly active. On her days off, Mom was completely present, making elaborate dinners, helping with homework, taking me shopping for necessities. The contrast was dramatic, yet sustained. Her friends rallied around us during those months. Women from the hospital, neighbors from our old block, people I'd known my entire life. They dropped off casseroles, offered babysitting, forming a support network to replace some of the void left by losing half our family. Mom gently accepted their compassion, which could be overwhelming at times. Dad tried to build a relationship through letters, long, meandering pages about regret and growth, promises to do better, and explanations for why he had reacted so badly. Mom reviewed each one first, looking for anything inappropriate before deciding whether to give them to me. Most went straight into a file folder she kept for legal purposes. The few she did give me felt hollow, like meaningless words on paper, unable to restore what had been done. I tried reading one once, and got 3 paragraphs in before my fury flared so much I had to put it down. He wrote about understanding my perspective, about the therapy he'd started, about trying to regain my trust. It all sounded like scripts from a self-help book, empty statements that proved he knew intellectually what he'd done wrong, but didn't feel the crushing weight of it. I struggled with insomnia through my freshman year. I'd lie awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, my mind racing with countless what-ifs. What if I hadn't made it to Sophie's house? What if the Collins family hadn't been there? The what-ifs were endless and exhausting. Mom eventually sent me to a sleep doctor who prescribed medicine that helped, but the dreams still came sometimes. High school started tough. Freshman year brought a building full of classmates who had heard variants of my story, most of them distorted from repeated tellings. Some kids treated me like a morbid celebrity, asking for details about the snow and the beating. Others avoided me completely, uncomfortable with the living reminder that parents can be deadly. I learned to navigate both extremes by keeping my head down and focusing on my studies. Sophie and I ended up in different friend groups that year, a natural progression as people developed distinct interests. She remained kind and continued to invite me to things, but we weren't as close as we had been. Our shared trauma had briefly bonded us, but true friendship required more than that. We stayed friendly until graduation, then lost touch as college took us in different directions. Mom started dating when I was 15, taking great care to ensure I was comfortable with anyone she introduced me to. None of the relationships lasted long. She'd learned to spot red flags, to walk away at the first sign of dishonesty or anger. Her standards had risen to impossibly high levels, which felt fair given what we'd been through. One person, James, lasted over 7 months. He was gentle with my suspicions, never pushed too hard, always respected Mom's boundaries. They'd go out to dinner or movies while I stayed home, and he'd leave her with nothing but a kiss goodnight on the porch. I admired his discipline, even if I resented his presence. Mom eventually ended it, realizing I wasn't ready to share her with anyone. Dad's attempts to re-enter my life intensified around my 17th birthday. Letters turned into phone calls to Mom's number, which he wasn't supposed to have. Gifts started appearing on our porch, books, jewelry, items that showed he'd taken an interest in my hobbies. Mom cataloged everything, preserving the receipts and cards, building a dossier to chronicle his boundary infractions. When he showed up at her residence one evening, she called the police. Mom came up with the idea for the restraining order, which she executed with the same systematic efficiency she'd used in the divorce. Dad had been explicitly ordered to stay away, yet he had repeatedly disregarded that directive, demonstrating an inability to respect our limits. The court instantly issued the injunction, extending it to include both Mom and myself. Dad was apprehended by police the next day when he attempted to approach me outside school. Hannah graduated from high school by the skin of her teeth. I heard she barely finished her senior year, having skipped so many classes the school threatened to hold her back. In photos I saw on social media, she looked older than her years, more weathered. The girl who had grinned while watching me freeze had transformed into someone I could barely recognize. She walked out of Dad's apartment the day after graduation, crashed with friends, worked minimum wage jobs, and drifted through the next several years without a plan. Social media revealed a string of disastrous relationships and questionable actions, indicating the usual trajectory of someone who never learned to accept responsibility for consequences. I watched from afar, feeling nothing. Dad had a second episode, which cemented Mom's decision to cut him off entirely. He got into a confrontation at a bar, beat someone so hard their jaw broke, and was arrested for assault. The details were murky, but witnesses claimed he'd been drinking, becoming hostile when someone bumped into him. The pattern of aggression that started with me seemed to spread to strangers when alcohol was involved. His lawyer managed to keep him out of jail, but he couldn't avoid probation, mandatory anger management sessions, and limitations on his ability to spend time with his own children. Not that it mattered. I had already forbidden any communication, and Hannah had gone on to cause her own calamities. Dad had successfully alienated everyone who had ever cared for him. Over the next few months, I saw them occasionally, usually in stores or on the street. Dad always seemed shrunken, smaller than I remembered. Hannah was resentful, her face a permanent frown, hinting that life with Dad wasn't matching her expectations. I felt nothing when looking at them. No anger, no satisfaction, only a profound void where family once was. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison specialized in trauma and understood how to help me comprehend what had happened without pushing too hard. She said that betrayal by family left distinct types of wounds, that recovery was not linear, and some days were harder than others. She was right. Some mornings I woke up enraged, ready to scream about the injustice of it all. Other days I simply felt exhausted, weighed down by the sheer weight of everything that had happened. Mom never questioned her decisions. She had burned down our family, scattered the ashes, and rebuilt something new from the rubble. Just the two of us, figuring out how to be a family with half its members missing. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home to prepare dinner, helped with schoolwork, did all the typical mom things, but with a newfound, fierce protectiveness. High school came and went. I earned good grades, went to college, and built a life separate from the family I'd lost. Hannah reached out a few times over the years, sending emails implying a desire to reconcile, to restore what she had lost. I never replied. Some things are permanently broken. Dr. Morrison said that was okay. I didn't owe anyone forgiveness, simply because we shared DNA. Dad died when I was 26. A heart attack, abrupt and deadly. I attended the funeral because Mom claimed it would provide closure, though I wasn't sure I needed it. Hannah was there, older, but with that same calculating attitude she had at 17. She tried to talk to me about using Dad's death as a bridge to reconnect. I walked away in the middle of her sentence. This story changed everything about who I am. It forced me to face betrayal, cruelty, and survival head-on. But it also showed me the incredible strength of a mother's love and the unexpected kindness of strangers. I wonder, what would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to choose between forgiving and protecting yourself from someone you thought you loved? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.